The laughter on the screen was infectious, a weekly escape into the world of two best friends in a Milwaukee brewery. But while the world fell in love with Shirley and Laverne, a dark cloud was brewing just off camera, centered on the show's most eccentric duo, Lenny and Squiggy. For decades, the public believed the slapstick antics and high-pitched, hello, greetings were just part of the act. But behind the scenes, a different story was unfolding, one filled with hidden tensions, a mysterious past that predated the sitcom, and a shocking secret that Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall kept guarded until now. What really happened when the cameras stopped rolling, and why did the two leading ladies wait so long to reveal the truth about the men who lived down the hall? The year was 1976, and the world was falling in love with two girls from Milwaukee who worked at a brewery. To the millions of people watching at home, the set of Laverne and Shirley was a place of pure sunshine and slapstick joy. But inside the walls of Paramount Studios, beneath the bright studio lights and the echoes of canned laughter, a different kind of energy was brewing. It was an energy that shifted the moment two men stepped onto the stage. Michael McKean and David Lander, known to the world as the lovable, greasy misfits Lenny and Squiggy, brought something with them that didn't quite fit the Hollywood mold. While Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall were the heart of the show, they quickly realized that their co-stars were operating on a completely different frequency. The chemistry between the four of them was electric, but for Cindy and Penny, it was also deeply unsettling. They noticed early on that Michael and David weren't just acting when they played those bumbling neighbors. They were bringing a raw, gritty history from their days in an underground comedy troupe called The Credibility Gap. This wasn't the polished, safe humor of 1970s television, it was something born from the dark, counterculture clubs of Los Angeles. As the show became a massive hit, the executives in suits grew nervous. They wanted a wholesome family product, but in Lenny and Squiggy, they had unleashed a force of nature they couldn't entirely control. Cindy and Penny watched from the sidelines as the two men often communicated in a private shorthand, a language built on years of shared struggles and secrets that predated their television fame. There was a sense that Lenny and Squiggy weren't just characters, they were a protective shield for the men underneath. The actresses began to see flickers of a past that felt far removed from the bright colors of the sitcom set. It was a past filled with radical ideas and a brand of humor that pushed boundaries until they snapped. The spare parts of the show were quickly becoming the most unpredictable element of the entire production. While the audience roared at Squiggy's iconic hello entrance, Penny and Cindy were left wondering what those men were saying to each other when the microphones were turned off. The studio worked overtime to keep the duo's edgy origins a secret, fearing that the truth would alienate their mainstream audience. But secrets have a way of leaking out in the dark corners of a soundstage. As the show's ratings soared to the top of the charts, a mysterious and silent incident during a late-night rehearsal left Penny Marshall standing alone in the dark, wondering, did she really know the men she spent every day with, or were they hiding a side of themselves that was far more dangerous than their bumbling characters ever suggested? By the time the second season of Laverne and Shirley rolled around, the show wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural phenomenon. But as the pressure of fame intensified, the cracks began to show behind the scenes. Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall were finding it harder and harder to ignore the strange atmosphere that followed Michael McKean and David Lander. During a quiet moment between filming, a startling detail came to light about how the two men had actually secured their roles. It wasn't the typical Hollywood story of a lucky break or a perfect audition. Instead, it was the result of a secret pact made years earlier in the gritty trenches of the underground comedy scene. Michael and David had sworn to each other that they would only enter the mainstream on their own terms, bringing their subversive, Lenny and Squiggy, characters with them as a sort of Trojan horse. They weren't just actors hired for a job, they were a package deal with a hidden agenda that didn't always align with the network's vision. This revelation sent shockwaves through the relationship of the four stars. Cindy Williams, in particular, struggled to balance her professional persona as the sweet, dependable Shirley with the unsettling things she was learning about her co-stars' real-life antics. She began to realize that the boys down the hall lived by a code of loyalty that was impenetrable to outsiders. The psychological weight of keeping these secrets while standing in the bright spotlight of stardom began to take a toll. There were moments of quiet, simmering tension on the set that nearly broke the production apart. Conversations would stop abruptly when a producer walked by, and the air would grow thick with unsaid words. Penny and Cindy felt like they were walking a tightrope, trying to protect the show's wholesome image while managing the unpredictable energy of two men who seemed to be playing a much deeper game. The emotional stakes were rising every day. Was this a friendship built on mutual respect, or were they all just parts of a larger, more complicated strategy that Michael and David had set in motion long ago? The girls found themselves becoming the guardians of a secret they hadn't asked for, caught between the demands of the studio and the fierce, almost territorial loyalty of their co-stars. The bright Milwaukee sun of the sitcom world was starting to cast very long, very dark shadows. Every laugh on camera felt like a victory over the growing chaos backstage, but the effort to keep the mask from slipping was becoming exhausting for everyone involved. Just as the cast was preparing for their first major award show, a moment that should have been the highlight of their careers, a cryptic, unsigned letter arrived in the dressing room, one that threatened to expose the duo's shocking pre-Hollywood history to the tabloids and destroy everything they had built. Before the bright lights of Paramount and the millions of adoring fans, Michael McKean and David Lander lived in a world that most of America wouldn't recognize. This was the shocking past that lay beneath the surface of their sitcom success. Long before they were the bumbling neighbors in Milwaukee, the two men were part of a radical, avant-garde comedy scene in Los Angeles that thrived on chaos. They didn't just tell jokes, they pushed the boundaries of social norms and even the law. Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall began to uncover the details of a forgotten controversy from those early years, a high-stakes rivalry with another comedy troupe that had spiraled out of control. It culminated in a public stunt designed to mock authority, but it had gone horribly wrong, leaving a trail of legal threats and burned bridges in its wake. As the girls learned the truth, a cold wave of fear washed over them. This wasn't just about edgy humor, this was a history of rebellion that could be seen as dangerous to the conservative television networks of the 1970s. Cindy and Penny found themselves in a terrifying position. They were no longer just co-stars sharing a laugh on a soundstage, they were now the reluctant keepers of a secret that had the power to end Laverne and Shirley overnight. If the press got wind of the radical stunts and the underground defiance of Lenny and Squiggy, the show's sponsors would flee, and their own careers would be dragged down by association. The emotional atmosphere on set shifted from professional collaboration to a desperate, quiet alliance. The girls began to view their co-stars through a new lens, seeing the Lenny and Squiggy personas as a clever disguise for two men who had spent their lives playing a much riskier game. They felt like they were living a double life, presenting a wholesome image to the public while internally bracing for an explosion that seemed inevitable. Their relationship with Michael and David evolved into something complex and protective. They weren't just protecting their friends, they were protecting their livelihoods. Every time David Lander gave that goofy grin or Michael McKean adjusted his greasy hair, the girls saw the brilliant strategists underneath. They had to ensure the mask stayed firmly in place, even as the weight of the secret became almost too much to bear. The bond between the four stars became forged in the fires of this hidden history, creating a fortress around the show that no one else was allowed to enter. They were a team now, bound together by the fear of what might happen if the world ever saw the real men behind the Milwaukee Misfits. But as the girls finally gathered their courage to confront the men and demand the full truth about the past, they made a discovery that chilled them to the bone. Lenny and Squiggy weren't the only ones with a secret, and the studio executives had been quietly monitoring the duo's every move for months. By the middle of the series, the playful atmosphere of the Laverne and Shirley set had been replaced by a heavy, suffocating tension. The line between the actors and their characters was starting to blur in a way that felt increasingly dangerous. Michael McKean and David Lander seemed to be disappearing into Lenny and Squiggy, but not in the way a professional actor usually does. They began to carry the chaotic, unpredictable energy of their characters into their real lives, and the results were starting to show on the studio floor. The emotional strain on Penny Marshall reached a fever pitch as she stepped into a dual role, not just as a star, but as a mediator trying to hold the entire production together. She found herself constantly managing erratic behavior that the public never saw. There were days when the bumbling comedy of the Milwaukee Misfits felt less like a performance and more like a manifestation of a deeper, more volatile reality. The confrontations behind the scenes became more frequent, though they were carefully hidden from the prying eyes of the press. A silent battle for control of the show's narrative began to unfold. On one side were the writers and executives who wanted a predictable sitcom, on the other were Michael and David, who seemed determined to infuse the show with the radical, boundary-pushing spirit of their underground past. This tug-of-war left Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall caught in the middle, watching helplessly as the friendship between the four of them began to fracture. It was heartbreaking to see the joy of their early success replaced by a cold, professional distance. The hidden truth of the duo's history was no longer just a secret, it was a wedge being driven into the heart of the cast. Cindy struggled with the feeling that the men she loved like brothers were being replaced by the very caricatures they had created. The psychological toll of maintaining the facade was becoming unbearable. Every "hello" from Squiggy felt like a hollow echo of a simpler time, and the laughter from the live audience began to feel like a cruel joke. The girls were exhausted from being the buffers between the studio's demands and the duo's increasing defiance. They were grieving for a bond that was slipping away, replaced by a complex web of loyalty, fear, and creative differences. The set that once felt like a second home now felt like a battlefield where the stakes were their own mental well-being and the legacy of the show they had worked so hard to build. The internal pressure was reaching a boiling point, and everyone knew that something had to give before the whole world saw the cracks in the Milwaukee dream. After a particularly grueling day of filming, a heated argument broke out in a dark soundstage alleyway, a confrontation that ended with a whispered revelation so shocking that it changed the way Cindy and Penny looked at their friends forever, leaving them to wonder if the people they loved had ever truly existed at all. When the cameras finally stopped rolling and the brewery set was struck for the last time, a heavy, uncharacteristic silence fell over the group. The vibrant world of Laverne and Shirley vanished, replaced by the cold reality of life after a decade in the spotlight. For Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall, the decision to remain quiet about the chaos behind the scenes wasn't just about professional courtesy, it was an act of survival. They chose to bury the shocking past of their co-stars deep within the archives of their own memories, fearing that even a whisper of the truth would tarnish the joy they had brought to millions. But while the public moved on to new sitcoms, the four stars moved into a long, quiet era of reflection. This chapter explores the aftermath of their fame and the different paths they took. Michael McKean and David Lander found themselves haunted by the very characters that had made them household names. The industry often struggled to see past the grease and the "hello" of Lenny and Squiggy, leaving the men to battle the psychological toll of being trapped by their own creations. As the years turned into decades, personal struggles began to mount. David Lander, in particular, faced a grueling health battle with multiple sclerosis, a secret he kept hidden for years just as he had kept the secrets of his early career. The physical and emotional weight of these challenges only deepened the bond of silence between the four friends. Whenever they did reunite, the shocking past continued to linger like a shadow in the corner of the room. It was an unspoken guest at every dinner and every private phone call. Cindy and Penny watched as their friends aged, seeing the fire of their radical youth replaced by a weary, quiet resilience. The aging stars began to reflect on the heavy cost of maintaining a public facade for so long. They wondered if the pursuit of laughter had been worth the loss of their own authentic selves. The emotional narrative of this period is one of quiet grief, a mourning for the simple friendship they might have had if the world hadn't been watching so closely. They were four people who had shared a foxhole in the war of Hollywood fame, and the scars they carried were invisible but deep. The Milwaukee Four were now a memory, but the secrets they shared remained as potent as ever, waiting for a moment when the world might finally be able to handle the truth without breaking the spell of the show they all loved. Decades later, as the sun began to set on their legendary careers, a final, emotionally charged meeting between the surviving cast members set the stage for the truth to finally surface, but as the documents were prepared and the microphones were turned on, one haunting question remained: was the world actually ready to hear the reality behind the laughter? The long years of whispers and guarded glances finally reached a breaking point. For decades, the true nature of Michael McKean and David Lander had been tucked away like a faded script in a dusty drawer. But as time marched on, Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall realized that the silence was becoming a burden they could no longer carry. This chapter explores the deeply emotional moment when the two leading ladies decided to step into the light and share the Lenny and Squiggy they knew behind the grease paint and the leather jackets. The setting for these final interviews was far removed from the chaotic energy of the 1970s soundstage. It was a space of quiet reflection and somber honesty. As the cameras rolled, the narrative of the lovable misfits began to transform into something much more complex and human. Cindy and Penny spoke with a raw vulnerability, detailing the release of long-held guilt they had felt for protecting a history that was often misunderstood. They described the duo's radical past not as a scandal to be feared, but as the secret fuel that powered the brilliance of their performances. The shocking past they had once tried to hide was actually the foundation of the characters' rebellious spirit. It was the reason Lenny and Squiggy felt so real, so unpredictable, and so beloved by an audience that sensed something deeper beneath the slapstick. The resolution of the mystery brought a sense of peace to the surviving cast members. By telling the full, unvarnished story, the women felt they were finally honoring the memory of their friends as the complicated, brilliant artists they truly were. The focus of the narrative shifts here to the healing power of truth. After a lifetime of maintaining a public facade, the act of speaking out felt like a long-overdue exhale. It also highlighted the incredible, sisterly bond between Cindy and Penny. Their friendship had been the anchor that allowed them to carry this heavy secret for so long without letting it sink the show or their own lives. They had protected Michael and David just as much as they had protected themselves. As the details of the duo's early defiance and the studio's secret monitoring finally came to light, the story of Laverne and Shirley took on a new, poignant depth. It was no longer just a sitcom about two girls in a brewery, it was a story of loyalty, creative rebellion, and the masks we wear to survive in a world that demands we stay in our lane. The truth didn't break the magic of the show, it humanized it. As the final pieces of the puzzle fall into place and the interviews come to a close, one haunting question remains to be answered: did the weight of this secret actually make the comedy better, or did it slowly, invisibly destroy the very men who created it? The final chapter of this journey brings us back to the warm, flickering glow of the television screen, where Laverne, Shirley, Lenny, and Squiggy remain frozen in a simpler time. But for Cindy Williams and Penny Marshall, the closure they found in the end was far more profound than any sitcom finale. As they looked back on their lives, the lessons they learned about fame and friendship were written in the quiet moments between the jokes. They realized that the masks they all wore, the bumbling misfits, the cheerful brewery girls, were not just costumes, but survival gear for the high-pressure world of Hollywood. This chapter reflects on the incredible impact of the show and how the revelation of Michael and David's radical, shocking past doesn't take away from the laughter. Instead, it adds a new, poignant layer to every rerun fan still watched today. When we see Lenny and Squiggy enter that basement apartment now, we aren't just seeing sidekicks, we are seeing two brilliant artists who fought to keep their integrity in a system that wanted them to be simple caricatures. The story concludes with a deeply emotional tribute to the complex humanity of these four performers. It moves beyond the grease paint and the slapstick to reveal the real people who bled, cried, and kept each other's secrets for nearly 50 years. Cindy and Penny's journey shows us that the most enduring part of Laverne and Shirley wasn't the ratings or the awards, but the fierce, sisterly loyalty that allowed them to protect their friends until the very end. They proved that even in a town built on illusions, a real bond can withstand the harshest of spotlights. As we say goodbye to the Milwaukee Sun, we see the stars not as the characters who made us laugh, but as the brave individuals who navigated a world of studio monitoring and hidden agendas with their hearts intact. Their legacy is one of resilience and the quiet power of the truth. The laughter we hear in those old episodes now carries a different weight, a weight of shared history and the silent understanding of four people who went through a war together and came out on the other side. The Milwaukee Four may no longer be with us in the way they once were, but the story they left behind is a testament to the fact that the most beautiful things are often built on a foundation of secrets and struggles we never see. It is a reminder that behind every hello, and every punchline, there is a human soul trying to be seen for who they truly are. As the lights finally dim on the memory of the brewery girls and the boys down the hall, we are left with one final, haunting thought. How many other classic stories from the golden age of television are built on foundations of secrets that we are only just beginning to uncover?